Mi nome es Robert y eu amo JavaScript. Yes, yes. Thank you. Yeah, I can go home now. Years of practice. I love speaking Portuguese, but I have these weird tricks to remember things. So for me, Benvindo almost sounds like Ben Affleck. So that's how I learn language. I need to talk to Jed after how I should actually learn languages. I'm really happy to be here at LXJS, and I do love the party instructions with the up here, but it's kind of weeds some people out, so you only get the experts that's going to stick around. So, most talks today are going to be only 20 minutes, so we'll be rushing through things and hopefully cover as many things as we can. And I think looking at where we are in the mobile world right now, and I just saw this a couple of days ago at a conference, that we're all idiots with deadlines. And I think it has affected our choices with which tools we build with and what languages we choose and how we sort of adapt to some companies' strategies and buying into what they do and what they want you to do instead of you doing what you want to do. So it's more of a build-up, tear-down thing. And I think we can do better. I really do think so. And looking at some really weird shit in the mobile world, like with Yell, you have kind of two-page instruction on how to use the QR code, or you can go to a URL. And I think we're sort of messing up with mobile now. We're getting stuck in trying to invent new things where we had old things that have actually been working. You just need to make them better on mobile as well. So going back to 2007, and the first iPhone came out, which was an excellent device, and it was beyond most of the other devices out there. And they said, well, to build something for the iPhone, you can just build web apps. Just use HTML, and you're going to be fine. And then about a year went by, and then you had Objective-C, you had the App Store, and all of that. And personally, where I think this sort of went wrong there is rather the problem with the iPhone is that people building web apps, they couldn't access anything on the device. They can only have documents loading in mobile Safari. So I think instead where they should have gone is more exposing APIs, exposing access to contacts and the telephone and things like that. And we could have stayed with the web. So when they went to Objective-C, it was kind of a backlash, I think, for the web. But it's coming back. Like it's never going to give up. And then if you build mobile web apps with HTML5, for instance, right now, and then you want to ship on a number of different platforms, well, you can either stick with HTML5, you have the core in HTML5, or you can do Objective-C, and you can do Java for Android and such. And I think this is sort of how I see PhoneGap right now. I'll let you read it quickly. But it's basically, PhoneGap is excellent, but it's an interim solution, right? So this sort of solves the problem, but it's not the way you wanted it to be. And I think we can go much, much further there. Which leads me to the main topic here today. So with Firefox OS and with Mozilla, Mozilla is a non-profit organization. And the reason for existing for Mozilla is to make sure that the web stays open and not just one company has too much control. The internet is such an important democratic medium for us, we can't let that go away. So we started to see what we can do in the mobile sector. With iOS, we couldn't get in, we couldn't have a browser, something like that. With Android, we can have a browser, but Google has a fair amount of control. Looking at Windows Phone, we can't have a browser. So we were looking at the options. What could we do instead? And it got to the point of building an entire mobile operating system, completely based on open standards. And everything in the mobile operating system is just HTML5, CSS, and JavaScript. So as soon as you boot up a phone with Firefox OS, it's more or less like a Firefox window. Everything you see is the web. It's not like we have our own native language to build a user interface, and then you would build apps in HTML5. So everything in the user interface, all the icons, all the home screens and all that, that's all HTML5 as well. So we're all working on the same terms, so we have access to the same things. And one thing I really like about that, and especially with being Mozilla, is that we've done everything open source. And really open source, not open source. No comments. From day one, both with the operating system, but also with the user face itself called Gaia, it's all been on GitHub. So you can go in there, you can look at the code, you can copy the code and build your own things based on that. if you think you can do something better than we can do, by all means, you can just commit any kind of patch to it as well. I think so far we've had about 300 different contributors external that made the user interface better, and we'll keep on improving on it. Just do a pull request and you're good to go. And another thing, and this comes up over and over again, and I have a couple of Firefox OS phones with me, so you can catch me later, is when people try the phone, it's like, yeah, but it's not like my iPhone, or it's not like my Nexus 4. And that's not really our goal to begin with. Our goal is rather, there's an estimate that 2 billion people are going to come online in the next few years, and almost all of them through mobile. And we're talking about South America, we're talking about Africa, India, China, etc. And we need to make sure, I think it's actually our responsibility as mankind, to make sure they can take part of the web as well. The web is amazing, and they need to be able to be a part of that too. So the idea is, with Firefox OS, to have really affordable devices. So we're talking about, maybe up to 60 euro or something for a phone, and not more. And of course, you don't have the same hardware in a 60 euro phone that you have in an iPhone, for instance. So it's more about competing with feature phones, like old Nokia phones, when one button on the phone is actually bigger than the display itself, those kind of phones. How can we give them a smartphone experience for the same price? Or introduce them to the web? They might even never had a phone before. Then, over time, we'll see where it's going to go. We have a number of operators that we partner with. We have a number of hardware partners. And one of the recent hardware partners a few months ago was Foxconn. And Foxconn, the company who built the first iPad, for instance, they're looking into building a huge number of different devices. I think it's 7 different kinds of devices. So we're talking low-end mobile phones, but also mid-end and high-end phones. And we also have LG and Sony as partners as well. And LG and Sony usually don't build, less expensive things. I was going to say cheap, but my PR training says that I can't use the word cheap. And they're also looking into tablets and having Firefox OS in TVs and such. And I really do like that, though. I really do think that the web can be an amazing platform for all kinds of different devices. So it'll be interesting to see where that goes. The second question I usually get is, sure, that sounds fine. How can I test with a phone? We, being Mozilla, means that we don't have as much money as a lot of other companies. So we can't just, throw our phones and we'll hug it out together and drink beer and try to read the up sign. So another way of actually getting a phone is that they're being sold on eBay right now for 59.99, 59 euros. Or is it actually, what's this? Yeah, well, it's pounds in UK. And they're available in the US as well. But that's an unlocked device. There's nothing that you need to sort of sign up for or anything. It's just a device that you can play around with, you can test with, and then see how it works. And also, building a mobile operating system, personally, I'm a big believer in URLs, as you saw. I think it could be really easy. I think this kind of app fixation has gone a bit too far. Because, as most of you, I guess at least, you install all the apps in the world, and after a few months, you use about 5 of them. So I think it could be made a lot easier. But end users still expect apps. So we were looking, okay, so if we have HTML5, and we do want to have it as a web layer, but users want to have apps, what can we do? So we started with the open web apps concept. And basically, if you have something in HTML5 right now, especially have something built with responsive design, it would work right out of the box in Firefox OS. You don't need to adapt anything, really. And, and it would work on the different ratios and all of that. And I know it could sound too good to be true. And I'm not going to say that, the Java write-runs run everywhere, because, that's not really true. But at least we can get closer to that. We can get closer to that with our thinking as well. So when you build open web apps, basically what you have your HTML5 code, and the only thing you need to add to package it as an app is a manifest file. So you have a JSON file describing the contents of your app, and you're good to go. And the JSON file could look something like this. So you just have the name of the app, the different logos for different resolutions, localization and such, and that's it. Then you have an app. So if you build something for iOS and Android and other platforms through HTML5, or for instance through PhoneGap, you could use the same code, but instead of doing the sort of PhoneGap magic around it and the wrappers and all that, just add the manifest and you support another platform. That's pretty easy. And we have two different kinds of apps. We have packaged apps and hosted apps. So hosted apps is basically that if you install the app, but you still run the app from your own web server, then if you want to have offline support, you can use app cache and HTML5 or similar solutions for local storage. But it means that you're in control as a developer. Like, you don't need to wait for a review queue to get someone to actually approve what you built. If you want to update it, you just update it, and it gets served directly from your server. We also have packaged apps, and the main reason with packaged apps is that there are some use cases when you want to have more security clearance on the phone. You want to do more, well, more intricate stuff. And then you can package the apps. So you take all the files that you have in your app, just zip them up, and then install them directly on the device. So of course, it's available offline by default then, but you also have access to more APIs on the device. And talking about APIs and going back to 2007 and the iPhone, what we've been working on to make the web layer much more powerful is to add a number of new APIs. So I think it's the current count is 28 new APIs or something like that, to give you access to hardware, to give you access to the devices, so the web can actually do many, many more things than it could before. And one important thing here is also that, of course, we support standards. Like, if we were to only build APIs that only work on our devices, that's kind of pointless. So all the APIs that we're working on are being standardized with W3C and the Device API Working Group. And on the device, we have a few security levels. So generally, we have regular web content, which could be anything that you run in a web browser. You have an installed web app, which is akin to the hosted web app I was talking about, running from your own web server. But then we also have the privileged web app, and the privileged is the one where you can access deeper APIs on the phones. The one on the right-hand side, the certified APIs, are APIs that only we can access right now. For instance, like accessing the telephone function to place a call. We don't want anyone in any web page to do a call through JavaScript on your behalf. And we also have in a wiki page listing a number of all these APIs. But I think the interesting part here is on the right-hand side, and you have the D and the A and the B. And D basically means if the API is available in Firefox on desktop, A if it's in Firefox on Android, and B if it's in boot2gecko, which is the old code name for Firefox OS. So it gives you a good indication if it's an API that's supported all across the board, or if it's only good to use on one platform. The mouse lock API doesn't make that much sense on a phone, well, unless you have a BlackBerry weird thing. And it's also shows you the different levels of certification or security for an app. So blue, for instance, means that it's a certified API. Green means that everyone can access it, etc. And looking at the manifest file before, if you want to access certain things directly on a device, you can add a permissions part in your manifest file. So if you want to access contacts, you can say, what are you going to do with contacts, and also what kind of access. Is it read access? Is it read create access? And on MDN, which is the best documentation site in the world, I'm not going to argue about this, that's fact. We have a good listing of all the different permissions and what you can ask for on the devices. So looking at a few of the regular APIs, it's anything from the standardized ones, like we're having battery, we're also having screen orientation, vibration, alarms, etc. So I'm just going to show up a few of them. So the vibration API, which used to be called the vibrator API, but then people had the wrong connection, and you sort of see where it's going. So it's a vibration API. We never talk about the past. And with the vibration API, it's basically how can you make the device vibrate? So you can pass in a number of milliseconds. You have a vibrate method, you pass in 1,000, which means it's going to vibrate for 1 second. The second example is kind of more interesting. You can pass in a pattern. So you pass in an array, which means that the first value is how long it's going to vibrate. The second one is how long it's going to be silent. Third, how long it's going to vibrate, etc. So you can build your own vibration songs or, well, something like that. Don't. And what I think is really cool, and I've always been a JavaScript developer for forever. Like I had hair when I started with JavaScript, so I've been around. With JavaScript, I mean nothing else. And one thing that I think is really, really cool is when you have a device and you can move it around, we have a device proximity API. So basically, if I have a Firefox OS phone and I move it around, I can detect through JavaScript how close I'm getting to stuff or how far away I'm getting to stuff. So you have the device proximity event, and you get a return value in centimeters because the metric system is the only one that's okay. And you also have a max property and a min property, which tells you the sensor in your device, like how close can I detect the value and how far away can I get. So in my mind, I was expecting, meters and having all kinds of cool apps. I think the highest number I've seen so far is 10 centimeters. So it's, okay. But I think it's mostly also dependent on the sensor in the devices. So we're going to have bigger values over time. And we also have the Ambient Light API and events with that, which I quite like. And with Ambient Light, if you have an app, you want to detect the light conditions where the user is using the app. So if I'm standing here on stage, blinded by the spotlights, and I hold up my phone, I'm going to get one value back. If I sit in my living room and it's all dim, I'm going to get one value. If I'm out in the bright sunlight, I'll get another one. So you have a device light event, and it returns a lux value. And lux value just explains basically how bright something is. And then the lux value is very, different. So a good rule of thumb is basically below 50 means that it's really, really dark. Basically, you're covering the sensor on the device. And over about 10,000 means that you're rubbing it against a light bulb or something. I know, I've tried, that this is what I do. And it's not actually one of the web APIs, but we also have page visibility. So it's a really easy way through a standard API in HTML5 to detect if your app is visible. So you have a visibility change event, and you just have one property on the document. You have document.hidden, and then you can know, well, okay, my app is in the background, and I don't need to do certain stuff. And otherwise, it's in the foreground, okay, go crazy. We have a few privileged APIs right now, and with the certified APIs, we'll try and make more and more of them accessible to developers. But right now, it's only a few. And it's about device storage, accessing things on the device, the browser API to build your own browser, TCP socket, context. System XHR is basically how you can do an XHR cross-domain, without using cores or something like that. If you use this, you can do an AJAX request to anywhere, which is quite nice. And one good middle ground here, I think, is web activities. And especially if you've been working with Android and you have intents, which I think is a really good thing, where an app can register what kind of action it supports. And then Google were working on web intents for a while, for a couple of years, and it sort of got frozen. Hopefully that'll get started again, and we'll kind of merge the work with web activities as well. I think that the scope that Google had for web intents was slightly too large, and web activities is really, really focused on doing one thing. Which means that from within your JavaScript code, you can call a certain activity. So even if you don't have security clearance for a certain API, you can still say that, well, I want to access the phone, or I want to access the camera, or something like that. And then the operating system is going to present you with a menu. So if I want to do the pick web activity for images, the wallpaper app, gallery, and camera is going to say, sure, I can give you an image if you want that. So you create a mouse activity event. You can do view, for instance, and you have a data property where you say, oh, well, okay, I only want PNG files. And then you have success and error event handlers, and you can handle the response. You'll get it back as a blob from the other app if it's an image. And going back to the manifest file, you have an activities part. So if you want to build the next best Twitter app, because we don't have enough of those, you can say that you support the share activity. And then you can say, well, I only support sharing for PNG and GIF files. And when my app is being called for sharing, I want you to send the user to the sharing.html file. And you also have disposition, which is either window or inline. Window means leave the current app and go into my app. And inline means stay in context and then do whatever you need to do. So getting started with Firefox OS, we have something called the Firefox OS simulator, which is just an extension that you install in Firefox. So you can run that directly, and you can also connect it to the DevTools. As you can see in the far right corner is a small connect button up there. So you can debug your code, you can do live changes to the CSS, etc., and see that directly in the simulator, which is a really easy and fast way to iterate. And being a web developer, I always like the notion of, code, save, go into the browser, reload. So you have the same keyboard shortcut support here as well, so you can do, depending on the platform, Control-R or Command-R, to just reinstall your app on the fly and see the actual results. So the workflow is really, really fast. And a while ago, I put together something called the Firefox OS boilerplate app. And almost all of the APIs that I was listing and web activities and such, I put small snippets of code in this app so you'll be able to test them and see how they actually work and see what the actual effect is. And it's not dependent on any library or something like that, because I don't think I should be the one choosing the library for you. I think you should have standalone snippets and then use whatever works best for you. We're also, it's kind of a sneak preview, we're working on something called the App Manager, which is more or less going to be the simulator on steroids. So if you're building any kind of web apps, you're going to have support for different devices, remote debugging to devices, installing apps, and all that. So it's going to be out in a few weeks where you can play around with it. And at the end of it all, what I think is important is that the web is awesome, and I want to make sure that it stays awesome and that JavaScript indeed becomes the lingua franca for all of us. Thank you.